When I was broke, my daughter-in-law called me a disgrace for renting. Yesterday, she showed up at one of my beachfront apartments and said, "This is perfect for our family, without you." I handed her the lease. She read the price, turned white, and begged. I just locked the door. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about yesterday. It's about 8 years of humiliation, 12 years of silent planning, and one moment when everything changed forever. My name is Elena Morrison, and at 62, I've learned that sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones closest to you. For 8 years, I've lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on Maple Street, paying $1,200 in rent every month. The carpet is beige and worn in places where countless previous tenants have walked. The kitchen appliances are from the early 2000s, complete with a refrigerator that makes strange humming noises at night. The bathroom faucet drips no matter how many times I've tried to fix it, and the living room window overlooks a parking lot instead of anything remotely scenic.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
It's not glamorous. It's not impressive, but it's been home since my divorce from Robert became final 8 years ago. The divorce wasn't pretty. After 28 years of marriage, Robert decided he wanted a fresh start with his secretary, a woman barely older than our son David. The settlement gave Robert our beautiful 4-bedroom house in Westfield Estates, along with most of our shared assets and his comfortable pension. I walked away with my clothes, my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and enough money to survive for maybe 6 months if I was careful. At 54, starting over felt not just difficult, but impossible. My son David was just getting married to Madison then, planning their dream wedding, and I didn't want to burden them with my problems or my tears. So I found this little apartment and told everyone I was downsizing for convenience. That was 8 years ago. 8 long years of Madison's subtle comments about my unfortunate situation. 8 years of watching her treat me like a charity case at family gatherings, speaking to me in that overly bright voice people use with children or the elderly. 8 years of my own son looking at me with what I can only describe as embarrassed pity, as if my circumstances somehow reflected poorly on him. The comments started small. "Oh, Elena, are you sure you can afford to contribute to Tyler's school fundraiser?" Or, "Don't worry about bringing anything expensive to dinner. We know money's tight." They grew bolder over time. Madison would make jokes about my cozy little rental, or suggest I might want to consider more affordable gift options for birthdays and holidays. She had this way of delivering these remarks with a concerned smile, as if she genuinely cared about my well-being, rather than systematically undermining my dignity. It all came to a devastating head last month at my grandson Tyler's 9th birthday party. David and Madison had rented the entire community center at their upscale neighborhood, complete with professional bounce houses, a face painter, and a fully catered lunch from that expensive Italian restaurant downtown. The guest list read like a who's who of their social circle. Madison's book club friends with their designer handbags, several neighbors from their exclusive subdivision with their matching SUVs, and Madison's sister Rebecca, who'd driven down from Atlanta with her investment banker husband and their 2 perfectly dressed children. I arrived exactly on time, carrying the gift I'd spent weeks carefully selecting for Tyler, a deluxe art set with professional-grade colored pencils, watercolors, and sketchbooks. Tyler had been showing real artistic talent lately, and I wanted to encourage that. I'd spent more than I probably should have, but seeing his face light up was worth every penny. I'd spotted Madison immediately, gorgeous as always in her flowing coral sundress and strappy designer sandals, her blonde hair perfectly styled in loose waves despite the humid September heat. She was holding court near the elaborately decorated dessert table, gesturing animatedly with her manicured hands as she regaled the other mothers with some story about their recent family vacation to the Outer Banks. "Oh, Elena," she'd called out when she spotted me across the room, her voice carrying that particular tone that always made my stomach clench with dread. "You actually made it. I wasn't sure you'd be able to afford the gas money to drive all the way out here." The animated conversation around her had paused. Not stopped completely, but paused in that uncomfortable way that happens when people sense drama approaching and aren't sure whether to flee or stay and watch the spectacle unfold. I'd forced what I hoped was a pleasant smile and walked over, acutely aware of how the other women's carefully mascaraed eyes swept over my department store dress and discount store shoes. I'd tried to dress nicely, but apparently my definition of nice and theirs occupied completely different universes. "Of course I made it," I'd said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wouldn't miss Tyler's birthday for anything in the world." Madison had smiled then, but it was one of those smiles that never quite reached the eyes, the kind that looked warm and caring from a distance, but felt cold and calculating up close. "Well, we're just so grateful you could be here today. I know it must be challenging on your fixed income and all." She'd turned to the woman beside her, a perfectly put-together blonde whose name I couldn't remember, but whose judgment I could feel radiating from every pore. "Elena rents a little apartment downtown. It's actually quite brave of her, really, starting completely over at her age. So many women would just give up." The blonde woman had nodded with that practiced sympathy wealthy people deploy when discussing the less fortunate. "Oh my, that must be incredibly challenging. The rental market is absolutely brutal these days, especially for people on limited budgets." "It really is heartbreaking," Madison had agreed, reaching out to squeeze my arm in a gesture that probably looked caring to observers, but felt patronizing to me. "We keep telling her she should look into some of those nice senior communities. You know, the ones where everything's taken care of for you. Meals, housekeeping, activities. So much less stress than trying to manage everything on your own at her age." I'd stood there feeling myself shrinking with every word, watching my daughter-in-law systematically paint me as a struggling, incapable elderly woman who couldn't manage her own basic needs. The worst part wasn't even her words. It was David, standing maybe 10 feet away near the bounce house where Tyler was playing, clearly hearing every syllable, but saying absolutely nothing. He'd caught my eye for just a moment and offered one of those weak, apologetic smiles that somehow made everything worse, before turning his attention back to supervising the children. That's when Madison had delivered what felt like the final crushing blow. "The thing is," she'd continued, dropping her voice to what she probably imagined was a caring whisper, but was actually loud enough for everyone within 15 feet to hear, "At 62 years old, you'd think someone would have figured out how to actually own property by now. You know? I mean, what kind of example does that really set for the children? Tyler's always asking me why Grandma Elena doesn't have her own house like everyone else he knows. It's getting harder and harder to explain without making it sound like she just never learned how to be responsible with money." The women around her had made those soft, sympathetic clicking sounds people make when they're witnessing someone else's public humiliation and want to seem compassionate while secretly feeling superior. I'd felt my face burn with shame and rage, a toxic mixture that made my hands tremble and my vision blur slightly around the edges. But I'd kept my mouth shut, just like I had for 8 years of similar moments. "I should go find Tyler and give him his gift," I'd managed to say, my voice barely steady enough to be understood. "Oh, of course," Madison had chirped with false enthusiasm. "I'm sure he'll just love whatever little present you managed to put together for him." I'd walked away on unsteady legs, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and humiliation that made me feel physically sick. I'd found Tyler playing with his friends and given him his art set, and his genuine excitement and gratitude had been a brief bright spot in an otherwise devastating afternoon. But even the joy of his happiness had been overshadowed by the knowledge that everyone at that party now saw me exactly the way Madison wanted them to see me, as a complete and utter failure. When I'd finally gotten home that night, I'd sat in my small living room surrounded by my modest furniture, my outdated television, and my stack of library books, and I'd cried. Not the quiet, dignified tears of sadness, but the ugly, angry sobs of someone who'd been pushed far beyond their breaking point. I'd looked around at my humble surroundings and made a decision that would change everything. It was time for Madison to learn exactly who she'd really been dealing with all these years. You see, what Madison didn't know, what absolutely none of them knew, was that the struggling, pitiful woman she'd been systematically humiliating for 8 long years had been living the most carefully constructed lie of her entire life. While she'd been building her perfect suburban existence in her perfect house with her perfect family and perfect social circle, I'd been quietly, methodically building something else entirely, an empire. And very soon, Madison was going to discover exactly what that empire looked like up close. The empire began with a phone call I never expected to receive. It was October 15th, 2012, exactly 6 months after my divorce was finalized. I was sitting in my tiny apartment kitchen, staring at a stack of bills I wasn't sure I could pay, when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was formal, professional, belonging to a lawyer whose name I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Morrison? This is James Patterson from Patterson, Mills & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Franklin Morrison." Franklin Morrison. My father-in-law, Robert's dad, who had passed away suddenly from a heart attack 3 weeks earlier. Robert and I had attended the funeral together, one of the last times we'd been in the same room without lawyers present. It had been awkward, painful, but Frank had been a good man who'd always treated me kindly, even after the divorce. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake," I'd said carefully. "Frank's estate would go to Robert, wouldn't it? We're divorced now." "Actually, Mrs. Morrison, that's why I'm calling. Mr. Franklin Morrison updated his will 2 years ago, and you're listed as a beneficiary. Could you come to my office this week to discuss the details?" 2 days later, I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent, listening to Mr. Patterson explain that Frank had left me $180,000. Not Robert, me. The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Frank's familiar handwriting. "He asked me to give you this when the time came," Mr. Patterson said gently. Inside, Frank's note was brief but clear. "Elena, you were the daughter I never had. Robert's a fool for letting you go, but his loss doesn't have to be your defeat. Build something beautiful with this." Dad, I'd cried right there in that expensive office, holding Frank's final gift and his final vote of confidence in me. $180,000 was more money than I'd ever seen in one place, but it was also something more precious. Proof that someone believed I was capable of more than just surviving. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, a notebook, and a dream that was starting to take shape. I'd always been good with numbers. I'd managed our household finances for 28 years, helped Robert make smart decisions about his 401k, even caught an error once that saved us thousands in taxes. But I'd never had the chance to invest in anything bigger than a savings account. Now I did. I spent the next 3 months educating myself. I read every real estate investment book the library had, attended free seminars on property management, and drove through neighborhoods looking for opportunities. I learned about cap rates and cash flow, about leveraging equity and building passive income. More importantly, I learned to see potential where others saw problems. The first property I bought was a small duplex in Riverside, a working-class neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. The listing had been sitting on the market for 4 months because it needed work. New roof, updated electrical, and cosmetic improvements throughout. The asking price was $95,000, but I negotiated it down to $85,000 because I could see what others couldn't: good bones, solid foundation, and location in a neighborhood that was slowly improving. I used $25,000 for the down payment and closing costs, then spent another $18,000 on renovations. I did some of the work myself: painting, basic landscaping, cleaning, and hired contractors for the technical stuff. By March 2013, I had my first rental property generating $400 per month in rent from 2 units. But here's the thing nobody knew. I didn't tell a soul about any of this. When David asked how I was managing financially, I'd give vague answers about getting by and learning to live simply. When Madison made her comments about my inability to own property, I'd just nod and change the subject. I let them believe I was struggling because I wanted to see who my family really was when they thought I had nothing to offer them. The duplex was just the beginning. I kept my day job as a nurse manager at St. Mary's Hospital, earning $65,000 a year, and every penny of rental income went back into investments. Within 2 years, I'd purchased a second property, a small single-family home that I renovated and rented to a young couple for $1,200 per month. By 2015, I owned 3 properties. By 2017, it was 4. Each investment was carefully chosen, methodically improved, and professionally managed. I used a property management company called Harbor Point Realty to handle day-to-day operations, so tenants never dealt with me directly. As far as anyone knew, Elena Morrison was just a struggling divorced woman living in a rented apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Madison was making comments about my failure to launch, I was building a portfolio that generated more passive income than most people earned at their regular jobs. While she was suggesting I look into senior housing, I was researching my next investment opportunity. The fifth property changed everything. It was February 2018 when Harbor Point Realty called me about a unique opportunity, a beachfront condo that had come on the market as a short sale. The owner was facing foreclosure, and the bank was motivated to sell quickly. The property was in Seaside Heights, just a 10-minute walk from the main beach, with gorgeous ocean views from the living room and master bedroom. "Mrs. Morrison," said Janet from Harbor Point, "this is exactly the kind of property that could really boost your portfolio. The location is prime, and once you renovate, you could easily get $3,200 per month in rent, maybe more during peak season." The asking price was $285,000, which was already below market value for a beachfront property. I'd been saving and reinvesting for 6 years by then, building my credit and my capital. I qualified for a loan that required only $57,000 down, and I had it. 3 months later, after renovations that included new hardwood floors, updated appliances, and a complete bathroom remodel, Unit 247 at Ocean Vista Condominiums was ready for tenants. The first family to see it put down a deposit that same day. That beachfront condo became my crown jewel. It was beautiful, profitable, and most importantly, it was mine. Every month when the rent check came in, I felt a surge of pride that Madison's comments could never touch. I owned a piece of paradise, and she had no idea. By the time Tyler's 9th birthday party happened last month, my empire consisted of 5 properties generating $8,400 per month in rental income. After expenses, taxes, and setting aside money for maintenance reserves, I was clearing about $6,000 monthly in pure profit. That's $72,000 per year in passive income, on top of my nursing salary. But more than the money, I'd built something else: confidence, security. Proof that the woman Robert had dismissed and Madison constantly belittled was actually quite capable of taking care of herself. Thank you very much. The morning after Tyler's party, after I'd finished crying and made my decision, I called Janet at Harbor Point Realty. "Janet, it's Elena Morrison. I need you to do something for me. I want to put the Ocean Vista condo on the rental market, but I want to handle the showing myself. Can you set up the listing but direct all inquiries to my personal number?" "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. Any particular reason you want to handle this one personally?" I looked around my modest apartment, thinking about Madison's smug face as she'd humiliated me in front of all those people, thinking about David's silence, thinking about 8 years of being treated like a charity case by people who should have respected me. "Let's just say I'm expecting a very specific type of client," I told Janet, "and I want to be there when they see exactly what they're getting into." I had no idea that Madison would call within 2 weeks, breathless with excitement about the perfect apartment she'd found online. But I should have known. Madison had always been drawn to beautiful things, especially when she thought she could get them without consequences. This time, though, there would be consequences. After 8 years of silence, it was finally time for my daughter-in-law to meet the real Elena Morrison. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 13 days after I'd listed the Ocean Vista condo. I was at work, reviewing patient charts in my office at St. Mary's, when my personal phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Hello, this is Madison Morrison," came that familiar voice, though it was pitched higher than usual with excitement. "I'm calling about the rental listing for the beachfront apartment at Ocean Vista Condominiums. Is it still available?" I set down my pen carefully, my heart starting to race. After 8 years of her condescension, Madison was calling me without even realizing it, asking about my property. The irony was so perfect, it almost felt scripted. "Yes, it's still available," I said, keeping my voice neutral and professional. "Are you interested in scheduling a viewing?" "Oh my God. Yes, absolutely." Madison's enthusiasm was palpable through the phone. "I've been looking at the photos online, and it's exactly what my family has been searching for. The location is perfect, The views are incredible, and frankly, we're ready to upgrade to something more sophisticated. Sophisticated. There was that word again, the one Madison loved to use when describing things she considered worthy of her attention. Things that apparently didn't include her mother-in-law. I see, I said. And what's your timeline for moving? As soon as possible, honestly. We've been in our current neighborhood for almost 10 years. And while it's been fine for raising our son, we're ready for something more upscale. You know how it is. You want to be around people who share your values and standards. I knew exactly what she meant, though I doubted she'd appreciate my interpretation. Madison wanted to be around people with money. People who would validate her sense of superiority. People unlike her embarrassing mother-in-law. Of course, I replied. The rent is $3,200 per month, first and last month's rent due at signing, plus a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. Are those terms acceptable? That's quite a bit, Madison said, and I could hear the hesitation creeping into her voice. But the location is so perfect. My husband David makes good money as an engineer, and I've been thinking about getting back into real estate myself. We can definitely manage it. David made $85,000 a year, I knew, because he'd mentioned his salary to me last Christmas when explaining why they couldn't help me with some fictional financial emergency I'd invented to test their generosity. Madison hadn't worked in over 5 years, preferring to focus on what she called family management and social networking. The math on a $3,200 rent payment plus their current expenses would be tight, but not impossible. Wonderful, I said. When would you like to view the property? Could we do it this Saturday morning? Around 10? I'd love to bring my husband and son so they can see what we're getting into. Saturday at 10 works perfectly. I'll meet you at the property. Can I get your full name for my records? Madison Morrison, and my husband is David Morrison. Our son is Tyler. He's 9. Tyler, my grandson, who had no idea his grandmother owned the beautiful apartment his mother was coveting. The same child Madison had used as ammunition against me, claiming he was embarrassed by my living situation. Perfect, Mrs. Morrison. I'll see you Saturday at 10. The address is 1247 Ocean Drive, Unit 247. Thank you so much. I have such a good feeling about this place. It feels like exactly what our family needs right now. After I hung up, I sat in my office chair for a long moment, staring out the window at the hospital parking lot. Madison had no idea what she'd just walked into. She thought she was upgrading her family's lifestyle, moving away from people who didn't meet her standards. She had no clue that the sophisticated beachfront apartment she was so excited about belonged to the woman she'd been systematically humiliating for 8 years. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of crisp October weather that made the ocean look like something from a postcard. I arrived at Ocean Vista Condominiums 30 minutes early, wanting to prepare both myself and the apartment for what was coming. Unit 247 looked spectacular. The renovations I'd completed 6 months earlier had transformed it into exactly the kind of space that would appeal to someone like Madison. The hardwood floors gleamed in the morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The kitchen featured granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and custom cabinets that I'd had painted in a soft gray that complemented the ocean views. The master bedroom opened onto a private balcony where you could sit with your morning coffee and watch dolphins playing in the surf. I'd furnished it carefully for showings, modern but comfortable pieces that suggested sophistication without being ostentatious, fresh flowers on the dining table, high-end linens in the bedrooms, and artwork on the walls that complemented the coastal theme. It was the kind of place that made people fall in love at first sight. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard voices in the hallway outside. Madison's laugh, bright and animated, followed by David's deeper voice and Tyler's excited chatter about being so close to the beach. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my simple black dress, and opened the door. Madison was even more perfectly put together than usual, wearing white jeans, a navy blazer, and designer sunglasses pushed up on top of her head. David looked handsome in his weekend uniform of khakis and a polo shirt, though I noticed he seemed tired around the eyes. Tyler was practically bouncing with excitement, already craning his neck to see the ocean. "You must be the property manager," Madison said with her brightest smile. "I'm Madison Morrison, and this is my family. Thank you so much for meeting us on a Saturday." property manager, not owner, not landlord. In Madison's world, a woman like me, older, simply dressed, clearly working for a living, couldn't possibly own a property like this. I must be an employee, someone hired to show apartments to people who actually mattered. "Please come in," I said, gesturing them into the foyer. "I think you're going to love what you see." The moment they stepped inside, I knew I had them. Madison's gasp was audible as she took in the open floor plan. The gleaming kitchen, and most importantly, the wall of windows showcasing the endless ocean view. David whistled low under his breath, and Tyler immediately ran to the windows, pressing his face against the glass. "Oh my God," Madison breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect." She moved through the space like she was already living there, opening cabinet doors in the kitchen, testing the smoothness of the granite countertops, peering into the walk-in closet in the master bedroom. Every detail met with her approval. Every finish earned a compliment. "The previous tenants really took good care of this place," she said to me as she examined the bathroom's subway tile and rainfall shower head. "Though I have to say, I'd probably want to redecorate a bit. Add some personal touches, you know? Maybe some different artwork, definitely different throw pillows. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to make it feel like home." "Of course," I said mildly. Many tenants like to personalize their space. David was more practical in his inspection, checking water pressure, examining the appliances, testing the firmness of the living room furniture. But I could see the want in his eyes, too. This was a significant upgrade from their current suburban home, a statement about their success and status. Tyler had claimed the second bedroom as his own, announcing that he could see 3 different beach access points from his window and that he'd definitely need a boogie board for the summer. His enthusiasm was infectious and genuine, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt about what I was planning to do. But then Madison started talking. "You know what I love most about this place?" she said to David as they stood together on the master bedroom balcony. "The privacy, the exclusivity. We wouldn't have to worry about certain elements bringing down the neighborhood quality." She was speaking quietly, but not quietly enough. I was standing in the bedroom, supposedly checking that the windows were properly locked, but I could hear every word. "What do you mean?" David asked. "Oh, you know, people who don't really fit in with this kind of lifestyle. People who might make things awkward at community events or property owners' meetings." She paused, then added with false sadness, "Like your mother, for instance. Can you imagine her trying to navigate this kind of social environment? The poor thing would be so out of place." David was quiet for a moment, and I held my breath waiting for him to defend me, to say something about how his mother deserved respect regardless of her circumstances, to show some of the character I'd raised him to have. Instead, he sighed. "Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not that I don't love Mom, but this is about what's best for our family. For Tyler's future. We can't let sentiment hold us back from moving up in the world. Moving up in the world. Away from me. Away from the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities, who had loved him unconditionally through every stage of his life, who was still sending him birthday cards with checks she supposedly couldn't afford." "Exactly," Madison said, her voice warm with approval. "And honestly, the distance might be good for her too. She's been so dependent on us emotionally since the divorce. Some space might encourage her to build her own life instead of trying to live vicariously through ours. Dependent on them, living vicariously through their success." I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing out loud. If they only knew that their dependent mother-in-law owned not just this apartment, but 4 other properties worth more than their house. They came back inside, faces flushed with excitement and salt air. Madison was already talking about furniture arrangements and where they'd put Tyler's gaming setup. David was calculating commute times to his office and researching the local school district ratings on his phone. "So," Madison said to me, "what's the next step? We're definitely interested, and I'd hate for someone else to snatch this up while we're making decisions." "Well," I said carefully, "the application process is fairly straightforward. Credit check, employment verification, references from previous landlords, the usual requirements." "That shouldn't be a problem," David said confidently. "Our credit is excellent, and I can provide all the employment documentation you need." "Perfect," I said, reaching into my purse for the folder I'd prepared. "Here's the rental application and lease agreement for you to review. Take your time looking it over, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me." Madison took the papers eagerly, already scanning the first page. "This is so exciting. I can't wait to start planning our new life here. Our new life. Away from people like me, people who didn't meet their standards, people who might embarrass them in front of their sophisticated new neighbors." As they prepared to leave, Tyler ran back to the windows one more time, his young face bright with dreams of summer days on the beach. Madison and David stood in the doorway, taking one last look at the space they were already imagining as theirs. "Thank you so much for your time," Madison said to me with that bright, condescending smile I knew so well. "I'm sure we'll be perfect tenants for a property like this. Perfect tenants. Perfect." If only she knew she was talking to the woman whose signature would appear on the lease as landlord, not property manager. The woman she'd spent 8 years treating like a failure and an embarrassment. But she'd find out soon enough. Very, very soon. Madison called me 3 days later, practically vibrating with excitement through the phone. "We want it," she announced without preamble. "The Ocean Vista apartment. We've filled out all the paperwork, and David's already spoken to our bank about transferring funds. When can we sign the lease?" I was sitting in my modest kitchen, the very same kitchen where I'd cried after Tyler's birthday party, looking at the rental application Madison had dropped off the previous afternoon. Their financial information was laid out in black and white: David's salary, their savings account balance, their current mortgage payment. They were stretching themselves thin for this apartment, but they could technically afford it. "That's wonderful news," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "I've reviewed your application, and everything looks to be in order. We can meet to sign the lease whenever it's convenient for you. How about this Saturday? Same time, same place?" David wants to take some measurements for furniture, and I'd love to start planning how we're going to set everything up. Perfect. Saturday would give me enough time to prepare for what was coming next. "Saturday works well," I agreed. "I'll have all the paperwork ready." "Fantastic. Oh, and I wanted to ask, is there any flexibility on the move-in date? We're so excited to get started on this new chapter of our lives. The sooner we can get away from our current situation, the better. Away from their current situation. Away from me. I'm sure we can work something out," I said smoothly. "We'll discuss all the details on Saturday." After I hung up, I sat for a long time staring at Madison's rental application. Her neat handwriting filled in all the blanks: emergency contact information, employment history, references. Under reason for moving, she'd written, "Seeking upgrade to more suitable neighborhood and lifestyle. More suitable." Translation: somewhere they wouldn't have to be embarrassed by David's struggling mother. Friday evening, I did something I hadn't done in 8 years. I went shopping for new clothes. Not at the discount stores where I usually shopped, but at Nordstrom, where Madison bought her outfits. I selected a beautiful navy blue dress that fit perfectly, along with a matching blazer and elegant low heels. I had my hair professionally styled at the salon Madison frequented, and I even splurged on a manicure. When I looked in the mirror that night, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the modest, apologetic woman who'd been enduring Madison's condescension for years. In her place stood someone who looked confident, successful, and definitely not like someone who needed anyone's pity. Saturday morning, I arrived at the Ocean Vista condo 30 minutes early again. But this time, instead of letting myself in with my owner's key, I waited in the lobby like any other property manager would. I wanted Madison to see me in my new outfit, to register the change, before I delivered the surprise that would change everything between us. At exactly 10 o'clock, they walked through the lobby doors. Madison looked stunning as always in white pants and a flowing pink blouse, carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. David was dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, while Tyler bounded ahead wearing a t-shirt with a sea turtle on it. Madison's eyes swept over me, and I saw the exact moment when confusion flickered across her face. Something was different, but she couldn't quite place what it was. "Good morning," I said with a warm smile. "Are you ready to make this apartment your new home?" "Absolutely," Madison replied, though she was still studying my appearance with puzzled eyes. You look different today. Very professional. Thank you, I said simply. Shall we go up? The elevator ride was filled with Tyler's chatter about which bedroom would be his and whether he'd be able to see the sunrise from his window. Madison and David stood close together, their excitement palpable. They were so close to getting everything they wanted: the perfect apartment, the prestigious address, the sophisticated lifestyle that would set them apart from people like me. Inside the apartment, they moved through the space like they already owned it. Madison opened closets and cabinets with familiar ease, while David tested light switches and examined the balcony railing. Tyler immediately claimed his spot by the living room windows, announcing his plans for watching dolphins. Everything looks even better than I remembered, Madison said, running her hand along the granite countertop. I can already picture our life here. Tyler will love being so close to the beach, and the social opportunities in this building are exactly what we've been looking for. I'm glad you're so pleased with the property, I said, setting my briefcase on the dining table. Shall we review the lease agreement? Of course, David said, joining us at the table while Tyler continued his exploration of his future bedroom. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the lease documents I'd prepared. Madison and David sat across from me, leaning forward eagerly as I spread the papers between us. This is a standard one-year lease, I began, pointing to the first page. Rent is $3,200 per month, due on the first of each month. Security deposit is $3,200, and I'll need first and last month's rent at signing, which brings your total move-in cost to $9,600. David winced slightly at the number, but nodded. We can handle that. Excellent, I said, flipping to the second page. Now, there are a few standard clauses about property maintenance, noise restrictions, and guest policies. And here, I pointed to a section near the bottom of the page, is where you'll find the property owner's information. Madison's eyes followed my finger to the relevant section, and I watched her face as she read the words printed there in clear black ink. Property owner, Elena Morrison. For a moment, she just stared at the page, her expression blank with confusion. Then she looked up at me, then back down at the lease, then up at me again. I'm sorry, she said slowly, but there seems to be some kind of mistake. This says the property owner is Elena Morrison, but that's my mother-in-law's name. That's correct, I said calmly. Madison laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. No, that can't be right. Elena Morrison lives in a tiny rental apartment. She doesn't own properties like this. She can barely afford her own rent. David had gone very still beside her, his eyes moving between my face and the lease documents. Mom? He said quietly, and I could hear the dawning recognition in his voice. Hello, David, I said, finally allowing my professional mask to slip into something warmer, but infinitely more powerful. Hello, Madison. Madison's mouth fell open. She looked at me, really looked at me, taking in my expensive clothes, my professional styling, my confident posture. This is impossible, she whispered. How do you own this place? I own this place, I said evenly, because I bought it. Just like I bought the 4 other rental properties in my portfolio. Just like I've been building a real estate investment business for the past 12 years, while you've been making comments about my inability to own property. The color drained from Madison's face. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, which in many ways, he hadn't. 12 years? David's voice was barely audible. I used the $180,000 your grandfather Frank left me, I explained. He believed I was capable of building something beautiful, even when everyone else seemed to think I was just a sad, struggling divorcee who needed their pity. Madison was shaking her head slowly, as if she could make this reality disappear through sheer denial. But you live in that tiny apartment. You act like you can barely make ends meet. You never said anything about owning properties. I live modestly by choice, I said. I wanted to see who my family really was when they thought I had nothing to offer them. I wanted to know if I would be loved and respected for who I am, not for what I have. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Tyler had gone quiet in the next room, perhaps sensing the tension radiating from the adults. So this whole time, Madison said, her voice rising with something between anger and hysteria. "You've been lying to us? Pretending to be poor while you actually own millions of dollars in real estate?" "Not millions," I corrected, "but enough. And I wasn't lying, Madison. I was listening. I was watching. I was learning exactly what you thought of me when you believed I couldn't do anything about it." David finally found his voice. "Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be better than this, and felt my heart break a little more, because I needed to know if you would defend me when you thought I was powerless. I needed to know if you would treat me with respect, even when you believed I was a failure. Madison was standing now, pacing to the window and back, her hands gesturing wildly. "This is insane. You've been playing some kind of twisted game with our lives." "No, Madison," I said quietly. "You've been playing a game with mine. For 8 years, you've treated me like I was something embarrassing, something to be hidden away and managed. You've humiliated me in front of my grandson, excluded me from family events, and made it clear that I wasn't good enough to be part of your sophisticated world." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean view that now belonged to me, not them. "The question is," I said, turning back to face them, "what happens now?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Madison had gone very pale, gripping the back of the dining chair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. David sat frozen, staring at the lease documents as if they might spontaneously combust and make this whole situation disappear. "You planned this," Madison finally whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You deliberately set us up. You knew we'd fall in love with this place, and you used it against us." "I listed my property for rent," I said calmly. "You called me. You came here. You fell in love with the apartment that happens to belong to the woman you've spent 8 years calling a failure." David finally looked up at me, his face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been shame. "Mom, the things Madison said about you not fitting in here, about the distance being good for you, we didn't know you were listening. But you said them anyway," I replied quietly. "And more importantly, you agreed with them." Madison started pacing again, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors. "This is manipulation, Elena. Pure and simple. You've been lying to our faces for years, making us think you needed our help, our sympathy." "When did I ever ask for your help?" I challenged. "When did I ever ask for your sympathy? I paid my own bills, took care of my own problems, and showed up to family events when I was invited, which, as I recall, became less and less frequent over the years. Because you never seemed comfortable," Madison exploded. "You always looked so out of place, so intimidated by our lifestyle. We thought we were being kind by not putting you in awkward social situations. You thought you were being kind by excluding me from my own family." David stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. Mom, why didn't you just tell us the truth? Why put us through this elaborate charade?" I moved to the window, looking out at the ocean that sparkled in the morning sun. My ocean, my view, my property that they had coveted while dismissing the woman who owned it. "Because I needed to know who you really were," I said without turning around. "After your father left me for a younger woman and took everything we'd built together, I felt worthless, disposable. When Frank left me that money, it was like he was giving me a chance to prove I was worth something." I turned back to face them, seeing Tyler hovering uncertainly in the bedroom doorway, sensing the tension but not understanding it. But more than that, I needed to know if my own son would stand by me when things got tough, if he would defend me when his wife treated me poorly, if he would value me as a person, not just as someone who might be useful to him. David's face crumpled slightly. "Mom, I do value you." "Do you?" I asked. "Because for 8 years you've watched Madison make comments about my living situation, my financial struggles, my inability to keep up with your social circle, and not once, not one single time, did you tell her to stop?" Madison was shaking her head violently. "You don't understand the pressure we've been under. David's job, Tyler's school, maintaining our position in the community. We couldn't afford to look like charity cases ourselves. So you made me the charity case instead." "We never asked you to pay for anything," David protested. "No," I agreed. But you never offered to help with anything either. When I mentioned my car breaking down, you suggested I take the bus. When I said I was cutting back on groceries, you recommended food banks. When Tyler wanted me to come to his school play, Madison suggested I might be more comfortable watching from the back row so I wouldn't feel out of place among the other grandparents. Each example hit them like a physical blow. I could see the memories surfacing, moments they'd probably forgotten, but that had carved themselves into my heart. The worst part, I continued, wasn't the money comments. It was being treated like I was contagious, like my circumstances might somehow rub off on you and damage your perfect life. Tyler finally stepped fully into the room, his young face concerned. "Grandma Elena? Are you sad?" "Mom, why is Grandma sad?" Madison knelt down to Tyler's level, her voice artificially bright. "Grandma's not sad, sweetie. We're just having a grown-up conversation about the apartment." "Are we going to live here?" Tyler asked hopefully. "Can Grandma Elena visit us at the beach?" The innocence of his question hung in the air. Here was a child who simply wanted his family to be happy together, who had no idea his mother had been systematically excluding his grandmother from their lives. That's something we need to discuss," David said carefully. Madison stood up, her composure cracking further. "Elena, what do you want from us? An apology? Money? What's going to make you feel like you've won this little game?" "I want respect," I said simply. "I want to be treated like Tyler's grandmother, not like a burden you have to manage. I want to be included in family decisions that affect me. And I want my son to grow a backbone and stand up for what's right instead of taking the path of least resistance." David flinched like I'd slapped him. "As for this apartment," I continued, gesturing around the beautiful space, "you can still have it. The lease stands. $3,200 per month, same terms we discussed." Madison's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Really? Even after everything?" "On one condition," I said, and watched that hope flicker. "You participate in family therapy. All of us, every other week for 6 months. We learn how to be a real family instead of whatever dysfunctional dynamic we've been playing out." "Family therapy?" Madison's voice was sharp with indignation. "We don't need therapy. We need to move past this and start fresh. Those are my terms," I said firmly. "Take them or leave them." David was looking between his wife and his mother, clearly torn between the apartment Madison desperately wanted and the accountability I was demanding. "What if we can't afford both the rent and therapy?" he asked quietly. "You'll find a way," I said. "The same way you found money for that boat last summer. Or Madison's spa weekend with her book club friends. You'll prioritize what matters to you." Madison was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean view she'd already imagined as hers. Finally, she spoke without looking at me. "And if we do the therapy? If we jump through your hoops and play by your rules? Then what? Do we get to be a real family, or will you just find new ways to punish us for not being good enough?" It was a fair question, even coming from her. "Then we see if we can build something better than what we had," I said. "Something based on honesty instead of assumptions. Something where Tyler gets to know his grandmother instead of being taught to be ashamed of her." Tyler looked up at that, his young face troubled. "I'm not ashamed of you, Grandma Elena. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart," I said, my voice catching slightly. "More than you know." Madison and David exchanged a long look, having one of those silent conversations that married couples master over time. Finally, Madison sighed. "Fine," she said. "We'll do your therapy. We'll sign your lease. We'll play by your rules." "This isn't about rules," I said. "It's about respect. It's about treating each other like family." But as I looked at Madison's resentful face and David's guilty expression, I wondered if respect could be demanded, or if it had to be earned. I supposed we were all about to find out. 18 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new home, a beautiful 3-bedroom house with an ocean view that I'd purchased using the equity from my rental properties. The morning sun painted the waves in shades of gold and turquoise, and I could hear Tyler's laughter carrying on the breeze from the beach below. The therapy had worked, though not in the way any of us had expected. Dr. Patricia Holbrook had been direct from our very first session. This family has some serious communication issues, she'd announced after listening to our carefully edited versions of recent events. Elena, you've been testing your family for over a decade instead of addressing problems directly. Madison, you've been using social status as a weapon to exclude people you're supposed to love. And David, you've been avoiding conflict to the point where you've enabled real damage to important relationships. None of us had enjoyed hearing those truths, but Dr. Holbrook had insisted we start there. The breakthrough came in month 4, during a session where Madison finally admitted something I'd never expected to hear. I was intimidated by you, she'd said, not looking at me directly. After the divorce, when you seemed so strong and independent, I felt threatened. David talked about you with such admiration, how you'd raised him alone after his father left, how you'd worked multiple jobs to put him through college, how you never complained or asked for help. I was afraid I could never measure up to that. So you decided to tear me down instead of building yourself up, I'd replied. I decided to make sure you couldn't make me look bad by comparison. It wasn't a complete excuse for 8 years of cruelty, but it was the beginning of understanding. David's reckoning had been harder to watch. I've been a coward, he'd admitted during month 5, tears streaming down his face. I knew what Madison was doing was wrong, but confronting it felt too hard. It was easier to let you suffer than to deal with conflict in my marriage. Dr. Holbrook had made us practice difficult conversations, role-play scenarios where David had to choose between keeping peace and doing what was right. Slowly, painfully, he began to find his voice. Madison's transformation was the most surprising. Once she stopped seeing me as competition, she revealed an intelligence and ambition I'd never suspected. She'd gone back to school to finish her real estate license, determined to build her own career instead of defining herself entirely through David's success. I want Tyler to see that women can be strong without tearing each other down, she'd said during one of our last sessions. The rental arrangement had worked out better than I'd hoped. Madison and David had indeed stretched themselves financially for the $3,200 monthly rent, but they'd managed it. More importantly, they'd honored our agreement about therapy and family inclusion. Now, as I watched Tyler and David building an elaborate sandcastle on the beach, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine contentment. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Running late for Tyler's soccer game. Can you pick him up from practice? 6 months ago, such a request would have been unthinkable. Madison wouldn't have trusted me with Tyler's schedule, and I wouldn't have believed she genuinely needed help, rather than simply testing my availability as free childcare. Now, it was just normal family coordination. I'd sold 2 of my rental properties last year, using the proceeds to buy this house and invest in a small real estate development project with a partner I'd met through my property management company. At 64, I was financially secure in ways I'd never imagined possible at 54. But more than that, I was emotionally free. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find David standing there with a bottle of wine and a nervous expression. Mom, do you have a few minutes to talk? We sat on my new porch, looking out at the water while Tyler continued his architectural project on the sand below. David poured wine into the glasses I'd brought from the kitchen, his movements careful and deliberate. Madison and I have been talking, he said finally, about everything that happened, about the therapy, about how we treated you, about what we learned. I waited, having learned the value of silence during our family sessions. We want to buy the Ocean Vista apartment, he continued. Actually buy it, not rent it. Madison's real estate career is taking off, and we can qualify for a mortgage now. But we wanted to ask if you'd consider selling it to us, and if so, what that might look like. It was a question I'd been expecting. The apartment had been their home for over a year now, and Tyler had put down roots in the beachfront community. It made sense that they'd want to own rather than rent. What does Madison think about that? I asked. David smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. She said, and I quote, "Your mother has been more than fair to us. If she's willing to sell, we should pay market value and be grateful she's giving us the opportunity. Market value, not a family discount, not a special deal. Fair market value." It was a level of respect I'd stopped expecting from Madison. The apartment's worth about $380,000 now, I said. The market's been good to waterfront properties. We know. Madison's been watching the comparables. We can make that work. I looked down at Tyler, now decorating his sandcastle with seaweed and shells, completely absorbed in his creative process. My grandson, who would grow up in a family that had learned to value honesty over appearances, respect over status. "There is one condition," I said. David tensed slightly, probably expecting another demand for therapy or family meetings. "Tyler gets to spend one weekend a month here with me. Not as babysitting, not as emergency childcare, but as planned grandmother time. Beach walks, cooking together, whatever he wants to do." David's relief was visible. "Mom, he'd love that. We all would." That evening, after David had collected Tyler and they'd headed home to start dinner preparations, a family routine that now included regular phone calls to include me in their day, I sat alone on my porch with a cup of tea. The last 18 months had taught me something important about power. Real power wasn't about having money or property, though those things certainly helped. Real power was about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserved from the people who claimed to love you. I'd built my empire not just with rental properties and investment returns, but with boundaries and self-respect. I'd forced my family to see me clearly, not as the struggling woman they'd created in their minds, but as the capable, successful person I'd always been. The price of that clarity had been high: months of painful therapy sessions, difficult conversations, and the constant risk that they might choose pride over relationship. But the reward was this: a family that functioned honestly, where love was based on truth rather than convenient fiction. My phone buzzed with a photo from Madison. Tyler at the kitchen table, flower in his hair, grinning as he held up a lopsided birthday cake. The text read, "Someone wanted to surprise Grandma Elena for tomorrow. Fair warning, he used a lot of sprinkles." Tomorrow was my 64th birthday. Last year I'd spent it alone, just as I had for the previous 7 years. This year, I'd be celebrating with family who finally saw me as I truly was. I texted back, "Tell him I love surprises, especially ones with too many sprinkles." As the sun set over the water, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a battle fought and won, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the patient application of truth and the refusal to accept anything less than genuine respect. I'd locked the door on my old life, the one where I was small and apologetic and grateful for scraps of attention. The woman who lived here now owned her space in the world, demanded respect from her family, and gave love freely, but never at the expense of her own dignity. It had taken me 64 years to learn that lesson, but it was worth every day of the wait.